there were some attempts to reestablish a version, not an exclusive establishment, but a kind of multiple, more tolerant establishment along Republican lines, small r Republican lines, I might emphasize, in order to inculcate piety and morality of a sort which would make people into good Republican citizens. It was the rejection of this idea that constituted disestablishment of religion in America. And again, I think the underlying notion here is that the state should not be able to control instruments for the formation of character or opinion. And just as we would not have control over the press, we would not have a BBC, we would also not have a C of E. Interestingly, if you think about all of the various institutions which propagate public opinion and help to form a public opinion and character, our new national government was committed to not controlling any of them. Now, at this point, one might think of, well, what about elementary and secondary schools? There was essentially no public school system in the United States until roughly the 1830s, so this was not even on the table. But it was proposed, both at the Constitutional Convention and then twice in the early Congresses, to create a national university, which would have something of this function for the sons of the elite to form a new national Republican unified group. This was voted down both at the convention and then at the in the Congresses. Our new America was not going to have any institutions for the control of public opinion. So that's the first point. The second is that disestablishment was based upon an understanding of separation between church and state, which depended upon the idea of limited government. John Locke, the great British philosopher whose work on the subject was studied by Madison and Jefferson and others, wrote, and I quote, "I esteem it above all things necessary to distinguish exactly the business of civil government from that of religion, and to settle the just bounds that lie between the one and the other." So this is the basic idea of separation between church and state. As you figure out what the government should be doing, you figure out what the church should be doing, and you distinguish between them. Well, this system turns out only works if you have a very sharp understanding of a limited governmental sphere. So when you compare Locke's writing about the proper bounds of civil government in his essay on toleration with Locke's understanding of the proper role of government that he sets forth in the two treatises on government, especially the second treatise on government, you'll see that this wall of separation between church and state is virtually identical to the limits upon civil government that you see in the second treatise. Essentially, the proper sphere of government is to protect the population against domestic violence, crime, fraud, etc., and foreign violence, invasion, and so forth, plus to maintain the basic infrastructure of civilized society. Locke did not imagine a government that was engaged heavily in such matters as education, charity, the arts, the economy, and so forth. Right, those things were left to the private sphere, and very frequently those were left, in fact, to the religious sector. That was true. Education and charity, for example, were almost exclusively regarded as within the purview of the church. Well, what happens when the ideas of a Lockean limited state cease to have purchase in the society, and that the government begins to become involved in ever widening spheres that previously had been private? That is exactly where all of the problems of church-state conflict come to be. So that the original Lockean conception of what is, he says, is above all things necessary to do is possible and workable under conditions of a limited state once the limited state goes away, once that wall of separation that keeps the government within a narrow sphere no longer operates, that's when church-state relations become much more complicated and fraught with difficulty. The third comparison that I would offer you is between free exercise and free enterprise. I was once introduced giving a talk some years ago as one of the nation's experts on the free enterprise clause. You may notice that there is no such thing in the Constitution. Not that that's ever stopped them before, but maybe there should be a free enterprise clause, but there is not. But there is certainly a great deal about free enterprise in the Constitution, and even more so, there was an expectation about free enterprise in the way in which the framers set up the government of a rule of law. The comparison here is that I think that in much the same way that free enterprise represented an abandonment of the old mercantilist ideology of government control over the various aspects of the economy, in the interest, mind you, of a better, stronger economy in the public good. That was the reason the mercantilists believed that they should have control over the resources, that government should have control over the resources of society. In much the same way, free exercise leaves this other important area free of government control, not because they believe that religion should have a lesser role in society, but rather because they believe that religion, if left free, would be more likely to flourish. So that just as a free exercise, I get the words mixed up myself, a free enterprise economy will lead to a more robust economy, that a free exercise religious sphere will lead to a more robust and more religious people. And in fact, you see the same arguments for free exercise and disestablishment of religion in the same places as you do the economic arguments. And I would just cite here Adam Smith's great 1776 work on the wealth of nations, most of which is an extended attack upon the various aspects of mercantilist economics, but one chapter of which is devoted to the question of the establishment of religion. And I'd just like to quote a couple of my favorite sentences from Adam Smith. He wrote, "The teachers of religious doctrine may depend for their subsistence upon the voluntary contributions of their hearers, or they may derive it from some other fund to which the law of their country may entitle them." In other words, you can either depend on passing the contribution plate, or you can have a fund to which the laws entitle you, a stipend from the state. He says, "Their exertion, their zeal, and industry are likely to be much greater in the former situation than in the latter." Now, how's that for common sense? A minister who has a guaranteed salary from the state is not likely to be one who has as much interest in building the congregation, building their enthusiasm for the mission of the church, and so forth. And so he says, and to continue the quote, he says that when supported by the state, the clergy, this is where his language gets so beautiful, he says, "the clergy, reposing themselves upon their benefices, would neglect to keep up the fervor of faith and devotion in the great body of the people. Clergy who have been given state support have many of them become very learned, ingenious, and respectable men, but they have in general ceased to be very popular preachers." Interestingly, Smith's friend David Hume, writing in about the same period of time, who believed that active, enthusiastic religion was bad for the public sphere, that religion was a kind of superstitious and deleterious influence on the public, was an advocate of establishment of religion for precisely the same reason that Adam Smith gives. Right? So disestablishment and free exercise were no more intended to depress religion or to secularize society than free enterprise was intended to depress the economy. Limited government and vigorous private religious sphere went hand in hand. Indeed, Protestant dissenting clergy were in the forefront of the resistance to monarchical oppression on this side of the Atlantic. So people should not view religion as antagonistic to freedom or secularization as necessary to a liberal democratic society, but rather should recognize that government control over religion is antagonistic to freedom. Thank you.